Good morning, Faith Community. Do you remember as a child how it gave you confidence to have your parents around? I can remember as a child learning how to ride a bicycle. As long as my dad was right there holding onto the seat, I could do it. But if he let go, I would fall. I can remember to this day the very first time I rode a bicycle on my own. I had no idea I was on my own. I was going along and I had ridden almost all the way to the end of the street, and I turned and I noticed my dad had let go some time ago. And instantly I fell down. As children, it gives us confidence to have our parents around. By the time we reach our teenage years, I think the opposite happens. Oftentimes, teenagers have less confidence when their parents are around. But you remember those early days when you just needed your mom or your dad with you, and you could do anything if they were there. I'm sharing with you this week about the new covenant, about truths of the new covenant. And what I want you to understand is that we gain confidence because Jesus is our high priest. Let me read to you the passage. This is Hebrews 10:21 through 22. It says, "And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed in pure water." Because Jesus is our high priest, we have confidence. Remember, I told you yesterday that veil was torn, so now we have access to God. I said we're all priests, but Jesus is our high priest. It's still scary to come into the presence of God. He is still perfect, and we still are not. We still have problems. We still fail daily. So what gives us confidence? It's that Jesus is our high priest, and he's sitting right there at the right hand of God. How does that give us confidence? Let me read to you from Hebrews chapter 4. In Hebrews 4 it says this, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need." Why does it give us confidence that Jesus is our high priest? Well, he has passed through the heavens. What does that mean? It means he came to earth and he lived a life as fully God and fully man. And it's so important that you understand that he was fully man. And what that means is he knows our weaknesses. Listen to the passage. It says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses." What does that mean that Jesus can sympathize with our weaknesses? Jesus knows what it's like to be human. Do you remember at the end of one of the longest days we have recorded in Jesus' life that the disciples are going across the Sea of Galilee and Jesus falls asleep? Have you ever wondered why Jesus fell asleep? It's actually quite simple. He fell asleep because he was tired. Jesus knows what it's like to have a human body that gets tired. Jesus knows what it's like to have a human body that feels down, that doesn't feel happy, that doesn't feel good. He knows what it's like to have a human body that gets sick. All of the weaknesses that we experience as humans, Jesus knows what that feels like. Jesus knows what it's like to lose someone and still knowing you'll see them again, to still feel sad. And Jesus, remember, at the graveside of his friend, he wept. Jesus can sympathize with our weaknesses. But the passage goes on. It says this, "He has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin." You know, it's dangerous when we talk about the temptation of Jesus that we devalue the humanity of Christ. And what I mean by that is looking at Jesus and saying, "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to be tempted like I am." Well, what does the passage say? It says he was tempted in every way as we are. What that means is he was tempted in every way as we are. Well, how can Jesus, who never sinned and will never sin, how could he be tempted? You see, the problem is that oftentimes we think that temptation is a sin. Temptation isn't a sin. James tells us that desire, when it has conceived, brings forth sin, but each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desire. You see, having desires isn't sinful. How was Jesus tempted when he was perfect? And there's this fancy word. He was impeccable. He was unable to sin. How could he be tempted when he didn't have a sin nature like you or like me? Well, it's quite simple. He was tempted in the same way that Adam and Eve were tempted. You understand that Adam and Eve, before the fall, didn't have a sin nature. How were they tempted? They were tempted because they had desires. You remember what Eve thought? That fruit, it looks good. It looks like it would be tasty. It looks like it's desirable to make one wise. It appealed to her desires, and those were unfallen desires. Jesus had desires without a sin nature. And so what that means is when Satan came along and Jesus hadn't eaten for 40 days and 40 nights, and he said, turn that stone into bread. Guess what? Jesus' stomach felt hunger. His saliva glands in his mouth would have been salivating at the thought of bread. Jesus knows what it's like to be tempted, yet without sin. Well, what does that enable him to do? It enables him to provide us the help we need when we need it. Because Jesus understands our weaknesses, and he's been tempted in every single way like we are, yet without sin, he can provide in every temptation a way of escape. Hebrews 10 tells us that with every temptation, God always provides a way out. And Jesus can point to that way out because he's been through it. He knows what it's like to be weak. He knows what it's like to be tempted. And so he can help us. So what do? We come boldly to the throne, find mercy and grace to help in time of need. Come to him. He's a faithful high priest. He knows what you're going through. He can help you. Thank you so much for listening to me today.